I mean, you've written about the balance of forces, this idea that you need a countervailing force to resist the NDR. And within the NDR itself is this idea of balance of forces, that if you advance the revolution as far as you meet resistance, and if you meet resistance, you have to pull back. So I think it's very important that organizations like ours, the Free Market Foundation, the Institute of Race Relations, other bodies like Sakeliga, AfriForum, that they play this very active role as civil society in providing that resistance. And I think your work, your research really is very useful ammunition in that fight. But obviously there's a political fight that's happening as well. And your book was published in 2023, and the following year, in May 2024, with these historic elections in which the ANC fell to 40%. You would expect that this would be a body blow to the National Democratic Revolution. But we see many NDR policies, the Bella Bill, the NHI Act, the Expropriation Act, either being signed right before the elections or immediately afterwards, in spite of protestations from the coalition partners in the Government of National Unity. So do you think the GNU has had an ameliorating effect on the NDR? If not, why not?
Well, I think it has to do with the balance of forces that you mentioned earlier. The ANC, like the Soviet Union, which trained it in this way of thinking, is very conscious that when you're implementing this gradual revolution, you need to move forward whenever you see the opportunity. But if you come across resistance or you suffer some kind of setback, you might have to step backwards so that you can step forward again in the future when you manage to...
Strategic retreat.
Yeah, it's a strategic retreat, that's all it is. And so there is a constant monitoring of the balance of forces both within the country and globally, which is important too. But within the country, the ANC, their support fell in the 2024 election to 40% from 57% in the previous election, and they no longer had a majority. So reading this balance of forces, they did what Lenin had done in 1921, when the balance of forces became adverse for him. Because at that point, there'd been the revolution in 2017, the civil war, the peasants were in rebellion against the system which Lenin and his supporters wanted to thrust upon them, and the economy was in huge trouble. And they really actually feared that their socialist thrust would collapse. So they decided the thing to do was to take a step back and to pretend really to have given up on socialism and to invite Western investment in and say that they were now looking, perhaps along the Chinese model, that the economy would primarily be in the hands of state-owned enterprises with a profit motive. Investment came in, and they were able to lay the foundation for industrialization to alleviate the huge resistance that they had experienced before.
And this was the new economic policy.
This was the new economic policy, and it was precisely read the balance of forces, take a step back so that you can advance. And then in 1928, Stalin came to the conclusion that enough of our foundation had been laid. So abruptly, he stopped the new economic policy. And then very soon we had the farm collectivizations and the starvation that followed that. The socialist path was back in full swing. So here, the ANC read that, and we are indebted to Mameloko Kupayi, who wrote in the Sunday Times in August last year that yes, the NDR is like Lenin's new economic policy. And she said, sometimes you have to invite the opposition parties in with you, and it doesn't mean that that's bad for your revolution. Obviously, they are hoping, I would say, that they can weaken their most important opposition party, which is the Democratic Alliance. And of course they knew that with the ANC at 40%, the DA at 22%, you could form a working majority with just those two. But they chose rather to go for a government of national unity, which has 8 other parties in it as well. And they've sort of managed to drown out the DA opposition through this mechanism, and simply to forge ahead. And I think their hope is that DA supporters will become very dismayed, because indeed we see one NDR invention after the next still proceeding. in the acts that you mentioned that have been signed into law, in the new ones that are coming now, like the mining bill, which will be so damaging to the mining industry. And it's quite clear that the ANC is still on the NDR path. So if the DA sticks with them and isn't able to have a real impact, and growth doesn't go up, and the unemployment crisis is even worse, will the DA supporters feel that the DA is worth as much as they believed it was worth before? And I think there'll be a disillusionment. That's the ANC's hope. That at the end of that time, they will be able to strengthen themselves and weaken the DA and get back to a 51% majority. Or at that point, the global balance of forces would have changed enough for them to go in with the EFF, the MK, that share their commitment to the NDR.
And in terms of the global balance of forces, the actions of the Trump administration, highlighting what's going on in South Africa. James Myburgh of Politics Web spoke about there being two channels of communication. Channel one is what the ANC uses to convey its message of the NDR, of race nationalism domestically. Channel two is for the international audience. That's all the Rainbow Miracle and non-racialism and the peaceful transition. But Myburgh describes the Trump administration as having tuned from Channel 2 into Channel 1, and the ANC doesn't like that they've done that because it exposes what's really going on in South Africa. So do you think the balance of forces has shifted against the ANC and the NDR because of this international pressure?
I think to some extent it has. I think Trump's victory was very unexpected. I think that within left circles there was a great deal of confidence that Kamala Harris would win and that Trump had been so discredited by the various, the court cases and so on. And then he won. And now he is trying to roll back what is really a kind of left ideology on many things, whether it's what we call BEE, what they call critical race theory, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of the climate issues, where it's obvious that intermittent renewables can never meet the energy needs of growing economies. So he's saying that we're going to use oil and gas for a long time. All of this was very unexpected. And at the same time, I think there's a great hope that there'll be sufficient criticism of Professor Trump, that the internal opposition, that of course there is still there, particularly from some of the more left-wing elements within the Democratic Party, will make sure that he's voted out the next time, in 4 years' time, in 2028, and that then one can go back to a sort of slow shift, which has been happening, I think, in the US, towards more left-leaning policies, and that if the US itself becomes more left-leaning, that this would be helpful for the NDR here. And I think that the ANC has been very comforted by the extent to which China's power has grown. Russia seems able to achieve a certain amount in Ukraine through aggression, which has been widely condemned across the world, but it's nevertheless continuing. And that the West seems often on the back foot. And I think their belief is that increasingly the BRIC-type bloc of states will become more influential. The global South will be have more of a say against what is left of the imperialist Western countries. So they're hoping for that sort of situation to arise. And for those of us who would like to see free market options going forward, there must, I think, be a real hope that the kind of fight back which has developed in the US will extend to other countries, and that there will be more of an opportunity for Western democracies to prevail over these autocracies.
And do you have similar hopes for South Africa? Do you think that we can turn things around? What's in our favor here?
Oh, I think we've always had strong countervailing forces. The ANC has tried to weaken them by deploying its cadres to the media, which have become increasingly, I suppose, almost complacent, perhaps, about some of the damaging policies.
Or complicit.
You don't get enough coverage about what the risks are. They constantly ignore the NDRs. They ignored the People's War. We also have many left-leaning civil society organizations, but we do have countervailing forces still, because they are independent voices. in civil society, business has still got influence and resources under its control. And we have, in the global environment, too, potential allies to find. And we have, the DA, I think, has probably won back some support through its success on VAT, its unwillingness to be browbeaten on the budget, and in fact that it's gained some sort of small victory there, and a willingness perhaps to look more closely at how expenditure could be cut, particularly some of the hugely wasteful expenditure on BEE. So yes, and then you can also see in countries like Argentina, which have gone so far down a socialist destructive route, that if you have a change of leadership, it's possible to get to a much better economic situation quite quickly. So I hope too that will encourage people in South Africa to stick with a free market option that works, reject the socialist one that does not. And for the many people who've not wanted to vote for the ANC for a long time, but haven't really been confident of any other party enough to vote in large measure for alternatives, that they will find alternatives that they support, that they're no longer just a stay-away vote, but people who go out to the polls and vote for parties other than the ANC and its clones, like the ENFF and MK, but vote rather for the parties that genuinely stand for growth and free markets and the independence of individuals and the entire economy.
Yeah, I think also thinking beyond party politics to how you can build power outside of the state, to diffuse power, as we were speaking about earlier, and to actually resist some of these more harmful measures that are emanating out of Pretoria. And I think one of the lessons for me from watching the likes of Millet and to an extent Trump is that you can't consensus seek your way out of these problems. The solutions lie in directly challenging these harmful policies. Seeking to soften them or water them down, actually you end up conceding to your opponents and losing the very thing that you're trying to protect.